And we're good to go. All right. So any questions before we get started? Anything specific come up this week that you wanted to talk about?
I did. If no one, go ahead. You first.
Okay.
Ladies first.
Go ahead, Renee. You're muted.
Okay. Hi. So I was looking at trying to set up the exclusive right to buy contract, the buyer agency, and then a buyer contract. If we're going over listing though today, that's probably not appropriate, but I wasn't sure how to fill it out for myself because I'm buying a house. So
right. Yeah, with any of these, so how the order that we go for the contracts is the first week we do listing, second week buyer, then we do the contract itself, and then we do kind of an open forum. However, that is the same question that would apply to the listing agreement. And basically, it's an agreement that you would have with Keller Williams, and you would be the actual buyer that would be on there. So you would put yourself as the buyer, and then you also sign as the representative. For the firm. I could technically, it wouldn't be a terrible idea for me to sign it, just so it's like acknowledging that I know that you're doing it should anything come up, but it doesn't matter. It's totally up to you on that one.
Okay.
All right. Any other particular questions before we jump in?
I had one.
Go ahead.
I signed a couple of agreements. I did this listing one, and then I did a buyer one, and I'm supposed to do another buyer one this afternoon. And I did the first two on paper, and then someone told me that was probably a no-no. I should be doing it on DocuSign. And but should I get those canceled and redone, or?
No. So a couple different schools of thought. I probably can count on one hand how many times I've actually had a listing agreement electronically signed. 95, if not 100% of the listing agreements I've ever gotten signed were in person because I want it signed while I'm walking out the door. I don't want to have to worry about any technical glitches or anything like that. That's just a personal preference. As far as the office is concerned and whether or not it's valid, it does not matter to us whether or not it's handwritten or done through DocuSign.
Is there, as a brand new agent, do I need to show it to you before I have them sign it there, or?
I mean, if you have questions about it, I mean, you and I have reviewed them, and I would trust in that. If you have questions, yeah, absolutely, you can send them to me, but there's not a requirement to do so. No.
Okay.
All right. Any others before we jump in? All right. So listings. I'm going to share the screen, and I'm going to bring up my calendar first so everybody can see what my calendar looks like. And now you should see the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Is that the case? Awesome. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to walk through this, helps me fill out walk through some do's and don'ts. Also allows me to kind of come up with any scenarios or be reminded of any scenarios that we may have that have come up in the last week or so. That kind of helps, the goal in this is to really use it as a template to walk through what I'm seeing, to walk through what you should be filling out, but then also triggers things that I've seen over the last, since the last time we had this discussion. So my goal in this is to cover the basics, but then also start some discussion. And obviously, if at any time you guys have something that comes up that you want to talk about specifically, you can throw the question in the chat box, raise your hand, yell at me, turn off your camera, that sort of thing. So, all right. So the first part of the listing presentation, or excuse me, the listing agreement's pretty self-explanatory, as in any South Carolina document. Really, the only thing you're allowed to do is fill in the blank, right? So first one is going to be between the owner and the broker. You do want to make sure in a listing agreement, you do have both people that are that can give or should give permission, are giving permission to sell the house, right? So if it is a husband-wife team, partnerships, whatever it may be, you want to make sure you have everyone's signature on there. And then it's between them and the broker. So the broker would be Keller Williams Realty, depending on what office you're in. So in one of the 4 offices, it'd be Keller Williams Key, Keller Williams Charleston West Ashley, Keller Williams Charleston Mount Pleasant, Keller Williams Islands. A lot of people ask if that does make a difference. It does, in the sense of, if you look at every document as what happens if something goes wrong, you want to make sure there's no gray area of understanding of who represents who, right? And that's from that standpoint. All right, next part is the time period of the listing agreement. So I got this question a lot lately, and actually the video I just sent out was regarding the coming soon Facebook page we just started, which we'll talk a lot more about when we get to page 3. But basically, this is going to be the period, in my opinion, this would be the date they sign the listing agreement, right? So if we'll just use today's date, if it's March 2nd, even if they're not going to go on the market, so to speak, or in the MLS until April 1st, you'd still put March 2nd on this one, and then ending at midnight on whatever date. It's up to you on how long you want to have for your listing presentation, or excuse me, your listing agreement. One of the things that we did, started to do early on, I heard about it, I think at a conference that was super helpful, is I always have the listing agreements ending at the end of June or the end of December. And that way I don't have to worry about an odd date in the middle of the month, the listing expiring, or an odd month where listing expires if I'm not paying attention. I just know at the end of June and the end of December, I need to go through and make sure if I have any listings that have not sold and I need to renew them, that I do it then. Quite frankly, it only takes one time of not realizing a listing is going to expire. And then you get a call the next day on the first day of the month and they're saying, why the heck are all these agents calling me? So that took about once. Not a good vote of confidence, to be honest with you. That relationship didn't last much longer. So that's just one of the reasons I did that. Again, at the end of the day, it's totally up to you. If you do, if someone does say, hey, I only want a 90-day or a 6-month, that's totally up to you. I still would round it to the end of the month, just so you know it's at the end of the month when it happens. Okay. Next part is the legal description of the property. Obviously, in a perfect scenario, you'd have the deed of the property that you could fill everything out. You probably won't, so you're going to go to the tax records, which you just fill out everything that you can. If you don't have information, just to be a little bit of a stickler, I would at least dash out. So for instance, if you didn't have the lot number, I would just put 2 dashes in there, just indicating that something is in there so it doesn't get filled up later down the road. Again, chances of that happening are slim to none. The address, the tax map number, if you don't have that, then you do want to do some research on the tax map number. If you want to, call the county and get that information, you definitely want to have these 2, and you also want to make sure they match. In the event you do have someone who's doing an assemblage deal where they want to sell 2 properties together, there are 2 ways to do it. The cleanest way is to have 2 separate listing agreements, because you have 2 agreements on there. However, the challenge that comes up with that is if they only want to sell them together and they're not the exact same size and they're not the exact same layout and everything like that, do you put half the price on one and half the price the other? So the other option that you can do is you can have the address and the tax map number of both on there, and just have them separated by a semicolon, assuming that they're next to each other and everything else is pretty much the same. This next one is the real estate described here and includes all improvement fixtures and additional property, if any, described here. We don't typically see a lot of stuff in here because, most of it's negotiable when it comes to the contract. So a lot of people say, what should we put in here? There is anything that they absolutely don't want to take. If there's a hot tub or anything like that, that they, like the thought of removing it or something like that, that may be a gray area. You can put that in here. Typically this is left blank though and negotiated during the contract. All right. Section 1, consent to dual agency or disclose dual agency or designated agency. Couple things on here. Number 1, this is where the seller acknowledges that they have received the explanation of the types of agency relationships that are offered. Those of you who've never been to a contracts class with me before, when I turn the screen share off and I put the camera on, it means I have something very important to talk about. This is not being done as much as it should be. And I do want to remind you that South Carolina law requires that in the first substantial contact with a potential customer or client, you do need to share with them the disclosure of brokerage agency relationships. Now, I understand that a lot of people aren't super comfortable with putting a piece of paper in front of someone the first time they meet them. And I understand that. And it's not hard to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, just so you know, part of South Carolina law is that I just need to make sure that you understand how agency works. This is nothing that you have to sign or anything like that. But here is the disclosure brochure that says the different types of agency. By the way, you explain that and then they choose how they want to be represented. I get the question a lot that says, what should I select? Should I be a dual agent? Should I be this? Should I be that? It's actually the client's choice or the customer's choice, depending on what they choose. So that's why it's important to explain the agency disclosure, and we'll actually put that. I'll go ahead and make a note that we'll put that on week 4 this month to walk through a good way to explain that. Quite honestly, for me, it's a really good script to use that kind of sets you aside as a professional. A lot of people blow over it, right? So if you want to look for a way to stand out in this market right now, say, hey, I'm sure you've been explained this before because it's required by law. However, I just want to make sure I show you what the different types of agency are. I know it sounds a little technical and that sort of thing, but I just want to make sure I explain this properly to you. Don't be afraid of that. Okay. Because they then have to initial it when they go to fill out their listing agreement. So if you're walking to your listing agreement, here's an awkward situation. I'm sitting down, Daniel's the seller, and I say, hey, Daniel, the first part you need to initial is regarding that you've received explanation of the types of agency relationships, which I have not actually given you. So let me give that to you really quickly. That's a little, again, anything like that is just a little bit of a knock on some validity, not to overthink it. However, if you can go into this and say, Daniel, if you'll remember when we first sat down or when we first spoke, we went over the types of agency. Did you have any questions about those? Because what you're about to initial now is just that that those have been explained to you and you understand what they mean. Okay. And then they give permission to either act as a dual agent or not act as a dual agent, and then same as a designated agent. Now, again, to clarify some questions on how that would work here in Charleston, anytime that you would be under contract with another agent within Keller Williams that is in Charleston, so that doesn't include the Keller Williams that are in Myrtle Beach that have access to this MLS, Hilton Head, Columbia. I think Keller Williams out of Greenville's got membership here as well. Just the ones in which I'm the broker in charge, you would have it as designated agency. Technically, it is. One could argue it's not designated agency because we're different entities. However, if you put designated, it's disclosure to say, hey, even though I'm in the West Ashley office and I'm working with Daniel in the Mount Pleasant office, it is the same broker in charge. So we are having that it's designated agency here. Okay. Dual agency would only happen in a couple of times. One would be as if the buyer and the seller both chose to be represented as a client by you. So if you had a buyer that wanted to be represented by you and you had a home listed and they both wanted to be a client, that would be dual agency. Daniel, I see your hand raised, so I'll make sure I come to that before I move on. The other one would be if you are on a team. So if you're on a team and if you're under contract with an agent on your team, that would be another area that you would want to have dual agency. You could have designated. I personally feel like it would be better for you to have dual. And then the other one would be is if I had a listing that came on and you brought me a buyer here because I'm the broker in charge, it would be dual agency there. So those are really the areas that you would have dual. Daniel, you had a question?
Yeah. What if they read that thing and they say they want something other than an exclusive right to sell?
That would be the only thing from a listing standpoint. Good question. From a listing standpoint, we only allow exclusive right to sell listings with Keller Williams. We don't do transaction brokerage for listings. We do for buyers, but not for listings. Well, I shouldn't say we don't for listings. We would if it were a situation where you had a buyer that wanted to purchase a listing, like a for sale by owner, then you could do a transaction brokerage in that one.
Okay. And what about on the buyer one? What if they want something other than an exclusive?
Same thing.
Right.
They could be a transaction broker if you would like on the buyer side. That's up to you. It doesn't really protect you at all. You're by default in both of these, just so we're clear, you're by default a transaction broker if they don't become a client, right? A customer definition, it moved from sub-agency to transaction broker in South Carolina. So if a buyer does not agree to work with you as exclusive right to buy, they by default have you become a transaction broker for them, should they decide to go under contract.
Okay.
Yep. Good questions. Anything else on that? If in any time, if there are any questions, if you're in the moment or something like that and you have questions, pick up the phone, shoot me an email. We'll cover those, because by the way, as we explain every perfect situation in this, about 14 different crazy situations are happening as we speak. So all right, so let's jump back to the contract. All right, so the terms of the contract come in section 2. pretty self-explanatory. A little bit different if you haven't seen the updated one. It's been out about a year now, but if you haven't looked at it too much, they did change it to where they split. They used to have it here where you talk about the commission being split. It's not. Here basically talks about the price of the property. You do want to put it in text as well as in numeric form. And then a total fee of either a dollar amount here or a percentage amount here. Obviously, if 9 times out of 10, it'll be a percentage amount. This is going to be the total percentage. So if you take your listing at 6%, you'd put 6% here. You'll address how that's split with the buyer's agent and transaction brokerage on the next page. To clarify, if you are going to be taking less than 2.5% on your side of the listing, you do need to have either mine or your team leader's approval in your office. It's not to say we don't allow it. It's not to say we don't allow the discounting of it. However, we do want to have kind of talk about that just so we can keep some sort of idea on what's going on as it relates to commissions, specifically discounting them. Yes, Nancy.
Just if you've capped already, does it make a difference to you then, or?
It does. We still would want to get an approval simply for a couple different reasons. I mean, the chances of saying no, particularly if you're a capping agent, it's kind of a moot point. However, we also don't want to set the precedence of being a discount brokerage, particularly at the size that we are. Again, I want to make sure that everyone understands that commissions are negotiable. I understand that. However, what you don't want to have happen is you're competing with another KW agent and they're like, well, Keller Williams over here discounts and that sort of thing. Be careful on that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I'd say iPhone, raise your hand, but
okay. Well, yeah, this is Steve Clark, iPhone. How are you, Joseph?
Good, man.
Okay. Great class as always. I appreciate it. Really appreciate it. I was always under the assumption that, let's say you did a 6%, it has to be divided equally. I'd heard that for the longest, but then someone told me the other day it does not. You could theoretically do a 3.5 and a 2.5. Is that true?
Yeah, so theoretically, you can divide it however you want. It is. I don't love that. If you take 7, if you list it for 7 and want to take 4 and offer 3, more power to you. You negotiate it up. There are some agents within Keller Williams. Again, this is no judgment. I'm never going to be the broker that's going to micromanage how you run your business. There are some businesses and teams with us that do 6 and they offer out 2.5, take 3.5. There's a strong argument that economically that makes more sense, right? You're going to spend more money as a listing agent on a listing. However, you're not making a lot of friends amongst your buyers. So just be careful on that.
Okay.
There used to be a strong argument actually that if fewer homes percentage-wise sold than were listed, if they weren't offering at least 3%. We used to run a study for the longest time that would say it would say about 15 to 20% of the homes that became active offered out less than 3%, and only about 8% of homes that sold were offering less than 3%. So you could argue it was a disadvantage to the seller. That's no longer the case. There's not really much of a discrepancy on homes sold versus homes listed based on the commission. So, at that point, you just want to keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good questions. Like some questions. All right. So let's jump back on to, yeah, Nancy, do you have one? You're muted.
It's not unmuting. Okay, I've been doing this a long time, and unfortunately, I have found recently that there are a lot of people doing that in this market. Buyer agents are just so happy to sell to get a contract accepted. However, like you said, it doesn't make good friends, and I've got several agents. I've been here 20 years, and it really does not. It puts a bad taste in your mouth. In a different market, it might change back again. But right now, listing agents do nothing for the money. So that was my argument: is the buyer agents are the ones who are working really hard. In another market, if you have to do brochures and do open houses and do brokers opens and do all that stuff, yes, you are putting a lot of money out. But this is a weird market, so I guess we'll just see how things shake out. So.
Yeah, I think I'd be careful on the broad brush on listing agents, because I know most listing agents are still doing everything that they were doing before. But yes, I see your point on that. The other thing you need to keep in mind too, and by the way, if you get a call as a listing agent and you're only offering 2.5% and a buyer's agent calls and asks if you'll be willing to pay 3, that they need to know that because they have a buyer's agency agreement that states they'll make 3. There's nothing wrong with that. So just a lot of people will call me upset saying, I can't believe Manny called me and, asked if I'd offer 3 instead of 2.5 before he'd show the property. Now you can't refuse to show the property if they're not offering what you want. What happens is not to go down a bunny trail, but there's the buyer's agency agreement. One of the options says that if you don't make your 3% off the sale, then the additional amount is the responsibility of the buyer. So if I'm looking at 2 homes that are otherwise identical and Renee's offering 3 and Manny's offering 2.5, it's going to cost my buyer more money to buy Manny's because they're going to have to cover the difference. So that's when buyer's agents call and ask that, that's why. So again, don't freak out on them. Don't act like they don't know what they're doing, because it's actually, we get that a lot. And we have a lot of agents that if it's not offering out 3%, they're going to ask if the seller or the agent is willing to pay the full 3. They want to know that because, again, if they have that in their buyer's agency agreement, it could cost the buyer more money. So that's another, again, just keep that in mind. I'm not saying that you have to do that. And I'm not saying that buyer's agents aren't coming to your listing because they are at 2.5%, because that is 1,000% a violation of license law. Just know that there may be situations that will cause questions. Okay.
So is that when we would come to you then? So say we did 5% listing and then it's 2.5 each side, and an agent says, oh, can I do 3% instead of 2.5? Would we need to present that to you? Because then I'd be accepting less than 2.5 on our end.
Because you'd be then sending the other 0.5% over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in that situation, if you've already, I wouldn't say to, lose the deal on that, but sure. Technically, yes. I actually haven't thought about that situation. Technically, Renee, to ask your questions, you would, but I mean, if that's what you're doing to get it closed or to ratify, then that's what I'd have a hard time saying, no, go back, tell them you won't do it.
So worry.
All right. All right, let's jump back into it. So continuing in the discussion of basically the terms of the contract is going to be the purchase price as well as the commission. And then it obviously says on here that your second paragraph talks about you are basically paid on a contingency, which means you're deferring your commission until the closing. That does not, you're deferring the commission altogether. That doesn't, I say we're paid on a contingency. Technically, we're not. We just defer our payment until closing. We still can technically have earned our commission even if it doesn't close. We'll come back to that. Then the last paragraph on here says that it's your protection period. Basically says if the property is sold within blank number of days of the expiration or termination of the agreement, whichever, which shall be the protection period, whichever one comes first. It basically would say that if they sell the property to someone who is shown by the owner, broker, or another broker, or any other person or firm during the term of the agreement, that they'll be protected. So basically, if your home was, if you had a listing agreement, you had 10 showings this weekend, and then they terminated the agreement, if any of those 10 people purchased the property, they still would be liable to pay you your commission. However, the protection period shall be terminated based on the last paragraph here should the owner enter into a listing agreement with another broker during the protection period. Okay, so just keep in mind that will protect you. However, if they relist, you will not be protected at that point in time. All right, page 2, for the purpose of the agreement, a sale shall be defined as any transfer of legal, equitable, or beneficial interest in the subject property. Basically, this is defining what a sale would be that would constitute you making your commission. Understand that. Paragraph 3 or section 3 talks about where you're going to be compensating other brokers. This is where you would put in there what you're offering. Buyer's agency, transaction brokerages, and or sub-agencies. Sub-agency is no longer a thing. I would have a feeling that in the next release of the listing agreement, sub-agency will be removed, because with transaction brokerage, that's what it defaults to. There was some communication early on that within Keller Williams, which I understand that we don't offer the same to transaction brokers that we do buyer's agents. That is not the case. If you want to offer less, again, that's totally up to you. I think it's a terrible idea though. Because you know whether or not they're represented by a buyer's agent or they're represented by a transaction broker makes no difference to you. Does not change your liability. It does not necessarily mean you're going to be working more. It just means that that buyer chose not to be represented fully by the buyer's agent. In my opinion, I wouldn't cause any reason for that agent, regardless of what their representation is, to not want to fully fight for them to have your property. So my suggestion to you would be is whether or not they're a buyer agent or transaction broker, you offer the same. It was at one point in time stated that you would not offer subagents the same, because subagents means that you would take on the full liability. That you do not do that with transaction brokerage. Celeste.
Kept trying to unmute myself and I kept hiding my screen. Going back to the bottom of the first page, how long do you put in for that space if it's sold within that amount of time?
I typically put 30 days.
30 days? Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Okay.
Again, if they're going to relist, it negates it anyway. So, all right, earnest money. Basically, the earnest money paragraph's the same as it is in every contract that we have in South Carolina, which is earnest money will be put up by the buyer, or can be put up by the buyer. It's not a requirement. It says, I promise to perform on the contract. Regardless of how, if anything were to fall through and there is a dispute, regardless of how clear it may be that someone is in violation of the contract, earnest money will not be released until we have an authorized agreement signed by all parties or an order by the court. Again, this is just another way to just start the conversation with your seller that earnest money is not as black and white as we want it to be. Section 5, owner agrees that the broker will put for sale sign under contract sign in their yard, assuming it is allowed by the neighborhood, and that you basically, it does default in here that you will, that you should, I should say, follow the neighborhood rules as it relates to signs. Broker's duties. This is what you're going to do as the broker. You're going to employ the best efforts to sell the property, right? You're going to describe the property and advertise it all the ways that you see that you deem to be the most effective information to be getting out to buyers so they will want to purchase the property. Paragraph 7 is like many. Someone got sued at one point in time. So this was put in here that basically says that the broker provides benefits and services that relate to marketing and selling the property. We are not in any way any sort of inspector, contractor, anything. We don't do anything other than schlep houses, right? So you can't hold us responsible for any legal, tax, any information that we have on there. It does also say that in the event that we do default, that anything goes wrong, that they will not hold us liable for it, and that they will not sue us. Now, whether or not, let me just go ahead and tell you, if someone wants to sue you in this market, it doesn't matter that they sign a contract with paragraph 7 in it. They will name you on there. But this is just one way to say, hey, I'm not responsible for these things. Now, as an agent, you would obviously want to word it a little differently. I do think it is a good opportunity to use the script, particularly on the buyer side, but also on the seller side. When you do have to start doing research of repairs that need to be done and that sort of thing, you are the communications liaison between the client and the professional. So let's just say in this situation, you're representing a seller, you get this long repair addendum. Let's say there's some structural things or those sorts of things on there. You should not be the one that's facilitating the entire conversation with the contractor. You should be connecting the seller with the contractor and allowing them to have firsthand knowledge of what's going on. Again, it all gets fast forwarded to something goes wrong and everybody gets sued. You want to make sure that you did your job in this and didn't take on the full responsibility of relaying. Because what will happen if you don't handle it correctly is the seller said, hey, Daniel said he was handling it. So he hired the contractor. He should have known the structural issues were there. No. So again, this just helps you kind of negate yourself from that liability, but you have to be able to communicate it. Section 8 talks about what the owner's duties are to you. Basically, in a nutshell, they want to give accurate information, right? They're also by the way, this is a good way to walk through some expectations that you have should you want to use this with your seller, right? So I'll just kind of show you a couple examples of how this will work. So part of the A, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, just want to make sure that you will provide me with all the information I need as it relates to the ownership of your property so we can close on it and we have marketable title. We don't have any encumbrances or any liens. And if so, we just need to know about them so we can take care of them. In addition to that, anytime you get an inquiry from other brokers or a buyer that's unrepresented or anyone outside of, straight through me, just let me know, right? Now, when you go under contract, you will allow the property to be inspected. Obviously, they will be inspected by a buyer, and the broker will be there should you want them to be. And obviously, if they have an inspector they've hired, they will be there. This next part, obviously, unfortunately do need to remind everyone that we don't offer the sale of the property to prospective buyers. We offer it, I should say, to prospective buyers without regard to the protected classes, which are age, sex, race, creed, color, religion, national origin, handicap, or familial status. This has not been updated to also offer gender and sexual preference, which is this just hasn't been updated from this form. However, it's still protected in there. Paragraph E on this is basically saying that they will allow you either reasonable expenses for repairs, utilities, maintenance, not to exceed a certain amount. I don't recommend that you taking on utilities or any repairs. If you do have a situation where that is the case, let me know and we'll walk through it. But for the most part, this should be zero. A couple times where this would happen, if you were doing some extraordinary or out of the box advertising that they said they'd reimburse for you, you could do that. If you are starting to get, if the market does take a little bit of a shift and there are more bank-owned properties, a lot of times the banks will ask you to put the utilities in your name. If any of that comes up though, let me know, make sure that we have a conversation about it. Celeste, did you have a question? Okay, I couldn't tell if you're about to raise your hand or not. Again, when we go to closing, the attorney will pay the commission out of closing. And then you'll also give us permission to post all the sales. It will still go out into MLS. It'll be posted out to Zillow, all of that information. Just want to make sure you're aware of all that. Continue to go down. I will be taking pictures of the property. I want to make sure you're okay with that you will be conveying marketable title, that there are no liens that won't be disclosed ahead of time. Again, on the attorney, you won't deal directly with any prospective buyers of the property during the period of this agency. And then you'll authorize me to respond to inquiries from the buyers or cooperating brokers to divulge the existence of offers on the property. It's always good to let them know if there's an offer on there, because then you can possibly get into a bidding war. And then a furnished broker with written instructions regarding the confidentiality of information should you terminate this. So if there's anything that you want to keep confidential for the seller, once it's terminated, then they would just need to tell you that in writing. Questions about that? Quick side note regarding talking about the existence of other offers. We're definitely in a multiple offer situation. So a couple things I want to keep in mind, just kind of techniques for you should you be in that situation. Never, never, never officially tell a buyer's agent you have multiple offers unless you actually have another offer. So let's walk this out. A couple different reasons. One, you don't want to lie. A lot of people say, well, I might be getting one, or I was told I got one. I think there's more of a risk of you losing a buyer that doesn't want to be involved in multiple offers than there is a reward of encouraging a buyer to put in an offer because they think there will be multiple offers. I've never met many buyers that like, oh, there's an offer on the table, let's definitely make an offer now. So that's just, again, been my experience. So let's say we play this out. I'm a listing agent. Manny comes to me and says, hey, I'm submitting an offer. Do you have any offers on the table? Do not. Had 10 showings, no offers. Okay, great. So Manny comes in, he puts in an offer, all's well. Then Celeste comes up. Celeste says, hey, do you have any offers? Yes, I do. I have one. So should you want to submit an offer, I'm going to go ahead and tell you to go ahead and submit your highest and best. Once I get it, I will then go to the first offer and let them know I have it. I do not go back to Manny and tell him about multiple offers until I receive said multiple offer. Because a lot can happen in that one conversation from me and Celeste on the phone to when she shows up with her buyer and they want to write the offer. And what I don't want to do is then go spook Manny's buyers in the event they don't want to be in a multiple offer situation. I go tell them, hey, second offer's coming in. He tells his buyers are like, we're out. We don't want to be a multiple offer. Celeste buyers changes their mind. Now I have no offers. Okay. Celeste, you have a question?
Yeah. So how should we do that just in the current climate with, like I've had a few multiple offer situations recently with representing the seller and one expires, say it's Friday and it expires at 5 p.m. and then, another one comes in and it expires, like they're staggered. So I've been trying to and I don't know if I'm doing this correctly, try to communicate that I've heard from someone, we're expecting an offer. I don't have one yet. And so to present it, and in my last instance, at least, fortunately or unfortunately, the husband is in the military and his time is limited. So I've been able to say, hey, I need you to extend that expiration date to Sunday at 2. But typically, how would you do that?
Yeah, so let's go back to the same example. So Manny puts in an offer, and let's say today's Tuesday. So let's say he puts in an offer, it expires tomorrow at 5. And then you and I start talking, you're like, well, I can't get my offer in until Thursday. And I could say, well, all I know is we will ask for an extension, but as of now, we have to reply to this one by 5. We'll see what we can do. I'm gonna go to Manny. So Manny, here's where we are. Well, actually, I'm gonna go to my seller first. I'm gonna say, seller, here's where we are. We have an offer from Manny. That offer expires at 5. Once that offer's expired, we don't have anything. Also, between now and 5 tomorrow, Manny can withdraw said offer at any time. They can find another house that came on the market. They can do whatever. So we have a couple options. One, we can counter, accept, and move on with Manny. Or we can wait to see if we have more offers that come in, at which point I'll ask Manny if they will extend their expiration. He doesn't have to say yes. And by asking, there is a risk that Manny's off buyers get annoyed and say, we're moving on. What would you like me to do, Mr. Seller? Well, Celeste, I don't know. What would you do? That's what they always say. Well, I would basically, I'd ask Manny if there's a chance they could extend the offer, the expiration, because we have 10 showings scheduled. However, Manny's a full price offer, right? And here are all the good things about it. There's something to be said where I would counter, get ready for Manny. Because here's the other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to let Manny know that you have multiple offers if you don't have multiple offers, right? So the other thing I would do is say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we're going to counter exactly how we would want Manny's clients to accept a counter offer. We'll have it ready to go. And then if 4 o'clock comes along, we don't have any other offers on there, then we counter, we work with Manny. They came in first. They're strong. That's how we should go. Now, this is a perfect world in a vacuum, which does not exist as of March 2nd, 2021. We live in a non-vacuum, chaos, emotion-ridden show. So all we can do is deliver this information where Manny says, no, we're going to wait until Friday because I think we're going to have 25 offers because we have so many people scheduled a showing. And at that point, you can say, okay, if that's what you want to do, then I will let everyone know. And then you can set a certain time. Now, what's happening is a lot of times people are saying, hey, due to the activity we've had, we're going to accept offers and review and respond by Friday at 5. So if you submit an offer, submit accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to get an offer from Manny that says, that's great, I want to know by Thursday at 5, which he can do, and your seller can either respond or not. Yep,
Yeah.
Manny.
I've had actually a few sellers agents do that, and I found my clients like that the best. They get the most angry when they have to come back for a best and final over and over. And so I find out the listings that have, we'll respond to submit your offers and we'll have a decision by this day.
Yep.
Works really well for them. So they're not, waiting around, while they can go still kind of look, because like you said, you can withdraw the offer. But I noticed when they have that on there, my clients tend to like that, I guess, verbiage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the deal, though. If at any time, you also have to understand that's nothing other than an email communication. So let's play that situation out. Let's say I go back to everybody and I say, hey, we're going to be reviewing all offers and responding Friday at 5. And you say, Manny, okay, great. I tell my buyers, the buyers come back and say, okay, let's think about this and put something together. We'll submit it on Thursday. If I get a full price cash offer this afternoon, I still have to present that to my seller. And that seller may look at that offer and be like, you know what? I ain't getting any better than this. Why would I wait? I've got 32 showings and a newborn. I'm out. I'm accepting this one. We're putting it under contract and we're moving on. So
That's
just everything can happen. Everything can happen. And by the way, when that happens, everyone gets pissed off and everyone will get over it. Right. So it's just, I mean, it's kind of the market we're in right now. And I tell you that not to be smug about it, just understand like this isn't, you think you're stressed right now, be a buyer or a seller in this market right now. Right. The only difference between us is we're seeing it all the time because we're working with multiple people. This is their livelihood. This is their home. This is their future home. This is where they're upsizing, downsizing, planning their future, planning their retirement, whatever it may be. So just keep that in mind. Yes, Nancy.
So if you put it in the listing and say, you know, showing start Friday, all offers will be presented Monday at 7 o'clock to sellers. You're saying if something comes in Saturday morning, we need to tell the seller that the offer came in?
Yeah, it's really kind of a conflict to put you're not going to present the offer until a certain point, because South Carolina law says that you must submit all offers or present all offers promptly. Now, promptly is to the eyes of the beholder, right? But play that out. You get an offer today and you've told everyone you're not going to present it till Friday. Agent doesn't see that. Agent submits the offer, doesn't hear back, gets mad, withdraws the offer. Fast forward, your client finds out you had a full price cash offer that you didn't present. Right? It's not good. So where your seller may say, hey, I don't, here's how we want to do it. You should push back and say, understand. And I won't give you, if we get 14 offers, I won't send them to you at 14 separate times, but each day I'm going to let you know what offers we got that day. That to me is the best way to do it. And we had a discussion about this in the top 20% mastermind in West Ashley last week, where some of those agents are saying, hey, we're not even presenting it to our sellers until this day because we don't want them to get overwhelmed. That's not your call. Just be careful on that. You can be running into risk. I met with an agent in Mount Pleasant, one of the top teams over there. Every offer they get in, it's emailed to the client, say, hey, review this. Have any questions? We're going to send you the summary at the end of the day of all the talking points of the offer. And they have a spreadsheet that they put, the big things in there, closing call, closing date, price, cost, those sorts of things. But when anytime they get an offer, it immediately goes to the client. I don't think that's a terrible idea.
It just seems like it's a lose-lose no matter what you do, because in my market here, there are people who say that, and then they've gotten a full cash offer and the seller's like, okay, we're good. But meanwhile, you put in the listing, we'll present. And the only other thing is, if you are the listing agent, you put it in that way and you get no offers, you have to make sure you take that out of the listing, because it looks really stupid when 3 weeks have gone by and it says all offers will be reviewed on March 3rd. It's like, oh, yeah. Great. This
April
is
1st, Nancy. Yeah.
Sometimes it's worded like that. Other times it's just said that they will receive offers and they will pick an offer by this date.
Yeah, I would say your safest is to say we will respond by.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have respond by this date.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Joseph, I have a question.
Okay.
So say for instance, I had one that I was on the buyer side and we showed it, but they listed it on a Wednesday. Showings weren't available until Saturday. Offers weren't going to be looked at until a Monday.
Yeah.
Is that the new niche, or what? I mean, what are we doing here? Like,
technically, I would argue that's a violation of license law, unless they've got some sort of specific written agreement by their client that they're not going to present offers. It's going to be case by case.
Okay. Because they listed it literally on Wednesday, but they would not show it until Saturday.
And that's fine. There's nothing. We'll get to that. We'll get to that when we get to section 13, because we'll talk about time frame.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I'm going to skim through some of these because, again, most of it's boilerplate. Property information, the property disclosure statement. Section 9 basically says, hey, you're going to fill out this property disclosure statement. You're going to be honest. Right. And if you're not, you can be in a lot of trouble if you withhold anything or lie about anything. Now, it's not your job to go out and inspect the property and find the answers. However, if you do know the answer to some of these and you're not honest about it, you can be held liable for failure to disclose. Again, a lot of questions are, if it's a rental property, they never lived there, do they not have to fill it out? No, they still need to fill it out. It's just it's no representation if they don't know. Paragraph 10 says that I will disclose any information about the property to the broker's agents, prospective buyers, because that's what we're obligated to do. Now, that doesn't mean confidential information regarding the client. It just means if I do know of information on the house, I do have to disclose it. 11 talks about if they are out-of-state seller, they will comply with South Carolina tax laws. 12 says if the property is affected by the provisions of the South Carolina Coastal Tidelands and Wetlands Act, an addendum will be attached. And then these surveys must be negotiated between the owner and the prospective buyer. All right, section 13. So here basically you have two options when you list the property. Option 2 should probably never be used. The only time it would be used is if you have a high profile, high net worth client that just does not want to have their information out on the MLS and is confident that we can sell it within Keller Williams. It's basically a broker exclusive to be shared only with agents underneath that broker or affiliated with that broker. Option 1 is the one they're going to use. Option 1 is the one where the property will be entered in the MLS for which the broker is a member within the time frame stipulated by their bylaws. Now, for those of you that are members of multiple MLSs, understand that just because the Columbia MLS may be one way doesn't mean that the Charleston one is the other way. You will have to abide by whatever that rule is. So that you just want to keep that in mind, and we'll get a summary out to that. Because if the Columbia MLS requires that you have to have it within a certain period of time of signing the contract and you put it in the Columbia MLS, that may be different from the Charleston MLS. However, by putting it in the Columbia MLS, you've now gone public, which then does trigger the Charleston MLS. So you just want to keep that in mind. Now, since most of us are only members of the Charleston MLS, we're going to go with those rules for now, and then I'll send out a video in the next couple of days with being members of multiple MLSs. Basically what this says is that you're going to follow the rules and bylaws. The rules and bylaws of the Charleston MLS are there is no time frame at which you have to put the listing into the MLS after signing a listing agreement. It used to be 2 business days. They've now changed that. They've removed it. There is no time frame that you need to put it into the MLS. They do, however, default to the NAR's clear cooperation rule, which states after public marketing, you have to go into the MLS within 1 business day. Okay. And then it talks about that it will be placed in all electronic marketing mediums, including but not limited to the internet, MLS data exchange, which is the IDX, will go out. Other firms who belong to that listing service will also advertise it, and that you will abide by all the rules and regulations of the multiple listing service. So let's talk about what that means specifically. Number 1, you sign the listing agreement today is March 1. You can put it in the MLS in September. It does not matter. There is no time frame. You can also put it in right away and say no showings until there is no time frame on that either. However, I don't know that you would want to do that unless the house is ready to be marketed. So if you do want to let's say you sign it today and they're doing work around the house, they need to do a bunch of things before you can have photography ready, and it's not going to go until April 1. You would have it signed, dated today. And then between now and April 1, you were just not able to publicly market it, meaning to anyone outside of Keller Williams with me as the broker. Nancy.
Does that mean a sign as well on the property?
Correct. Cannot put a sign on the property, cannot do anything outside of letting your brokerage know that it is coming soon, which is why we have started. If you haven't been invited to it yet, you will be the KW Greater Charleston Network, which is a Facebook page where we can do coming soon listings. It is currently just for coming soon listings. It's not for buyer needs. Now, if you share that with a buyer and the buyer goes public with it, you're putting that agent in a bad situation, because then that agent has to go and put in the MLS with 1 business day. There is a difference between legal and rules. This isn't a legal issue as much as it is an NAR rule issue. And I'm not saying therefore we don't pay attention to it. We pay attention to it. We're not trying to do anything to skirt that. The NAR rule was created just because a lot of people have a problem with this, myself included. I don't like the rule, nor do I agree with it. However, I do agree with the intent behind creating it, which was to protect a lot of egregious fair housing issues. If you've got some spare time, go to YouTube, type in Long Island Fair Housing Realtor. It's disgusting how people still behave in this day and age. This was one of the reasons for having it. It was the main reason behind it. It wasn't to conspiracy against agents doing coming soons or anything like that, all of which were all conspiracy theories I jumped on. But it is really truly to protect the consumer. Now, unfortunately, it's created a lot of unintended consequences, which is why we're having to do things like this Facebook page. Our MLS, quite frankly, has done an amazing job changing their rules to help us abide by this. The only thing they could be doing differently now is adding a coming soon module, which quite frankly is not necessary because we can go ahead and put it in there and just not have showings. So it's pretty much the same thing. So yeah, now the big question is what date do you put in the MLS when you put it in the MLS? It's changed from listing date to MLS entry date for the dates that you put in the MLS when you actually input your listing in there. So if you signed it for March 2nd, it doesn't go in until April 1st. You would actually put the MLS entry date as April 1st, and then the expiration date being whatever date is on your listing agreement. Questions about that?
Is that so that does it mess up the days on market from
It does. I mean, does it mess it up? Yeah. In the sense that if you put it on there and you don't do showings for 7 days, that's going to be 7 days on the market.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
So the question was, does it change the days on market, which was the push for having coming soon, is because that would not have days on market. So if you put it in there today and you're not doing showings until say March 10th, and then you do showings and it goes under contract within the first day of showings, it'll still show 8 days on the market. It won't be one.
But say for instance, so I have like right now I have a seller who has signed a listing agreement, but we haven't formally listed. Did you say we put the listing agreements date in, or do we put the actual date we input?
The date you input it.
Thank you.
Yep. And don't get too tied down to that. Greg Flanagan made a really good point in one of our Facebook posts the other day. I get it. You want to be competitive. You want to have good numbers, that sort of thing. You've also got to be able to tell your story, right? So if I'm Manny and I know that my typical protocol each time is to have 7 days before I do showings, and therefore my average days on the market is now 15 versus 7. I'm just going to tell everyone when I present that. So you'll see that my average days on the market is 15. The reason is because the first 7 of those we do coming soon to create some urgency. So you just want to be able to tell that story. Nancy.
Okay, so I sign a listing agreement with my sellers today.
Mm-hmm.
I don't put it in the multiple list. I put it on our office Facebook page privately, no sign, to give our office a chance. It gets shown by our office, it sells. Then what?
Goes under contract.
And multiple lists, how do you do that?
You can put it in there and then mark it active contingent. You can do 2 things. You can put it in, mark it active contingent. You can also just wait and close it out when it closes. I would mark it active contingent. Now, I want to be very clear on a couple of things. One, yes, this is an opportunity for our buyers to see it, and it is an opportunity for Keller Williams agents that have buyers to have another option. We also need to make sure that we understand that the seller's best interest is for every buyer possible to see their property. So where having it go under contract may be a good thing for the buyer prior to going in the MLS, and maybe a good thing for the seller, right? You want to make sure you very clearly explain to your seller that basic supply and demand says the more buyers that see it, the better chance you have of getting the best buyer. Okay. Now, understand, if you've got a young family with a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn, and they get a full price offer and they don't have to clean the house and show it 14 times, that could be best case scenario for them, right? So it's really about a matter of communication. Quite honestly, I've got an email out to our attorney to say, should we have some sort of disclosure if we get an offer to go under contract before the MLS? I don't also want to throw another document at a client right now. It's just about the communication side of things. Okay. Good questions. It's a lively contracts group today. I like it. All right, let's jump back to the contract itself. All right, so we've talked about the different options for once it's listed. Page 4, lockbox. Obviously, this is where the owner does agree or does not agree to have a lockbox on the property. You should not put yourself in a situation really any time where you have to be present for showings. That's not the highest and best use of your time. It also makes it very awkward for the buyer's agent, and it will limit the ability that you'll have to show the property. So just keep that in mind. You do not need a lockbox addendum unless you have a tenant in a property. If you do have a tenant occupied property, you will want to get the lockbox addendum signed in addition to the listing agreement, and that's signed directly by the tenants. Other offers, owner understands the broker is responsible to present offers to purchase to the owner for owner's consideration, terminates at closing on the subject property. So if you close and you get other offers, I don't have to submit it to you. Marketing the property after accepted offers. The broker shall not continue marketing the property after an offer has been accepted unless requested in writing by the owner to do so. Basically, that's saying that it's not offered as active. However, it will be active contingent. You do have to market active contingent. There is no way, shape, or form to get out of that with the Charleston MLS. That cannot be decided differently from the buyer's agents, the sellers, anybody. If it's under contract, it's under contract. Okay. 17 says commission rates are negotiable. 18 says that the owner agrees will maintain the property from contract ratification till closing, with the exception of normal wear and tear. We just had a situation where it was an estate property, and with the estate, or it was not an estate sale. An estate company came in and did an estate sale and got rid of a bunch of the personal property that was in there, and caused a little bit of damage to some of the walls, as well as I think something, I can't remember what, in the yard. That is the responsibility of the seller to fix, even though it wasn't caught on the inspection or anything like that. It happened after ratification. Section 19 basically says if you agree to sell and with a buyer, then you agree to sell with a buyer. It's basically just selling them ahead of time. If you do sign a contract to sell, you do have to sell. The property was built before 1978, then the seller agrees to cooperate in the lead-based paint procedure, which is basically means that they'll sign a disclosure stating that there may be lead-based paint in the house, and that we will provide the buyers the opportunity, or the pamphlets according to what or the appropriate pamphlets, and that if they want, they do have the option to do a lead-based paint inspection. Mediation clause says that if you and the seller get into a disagreement about anything, you agree to mediate before you sue. Paragraph 22 says you will not discriminate on all the protected classes. Again, it only names the one that were part of the fair housing when this was done in I think 2018. It has not added the new ones. However, it does not mean it doesn't apply. You can use a fax machine according to section 23. So I know that Manny uses fax machines quite a bit, with his generation. So I'm sure he's got that lined up and ready to go. 24 says an enforceable contract. 25 says that they do have any information, or any of the buyers have any information or curiosity or want the information as it relates to sex offenders and any criminal information, that it is up to the clients or customers to look that up on themselves. We cannot provide that information for them. Photography basically says that the seller irrevocably conveys any and all of the seller's audio, photography, and videography rights in perpetuity involving the seller, seller's family, seller's property to the broker for marketing and advertising. This, where extreme, is very important. However you choose to relay it to their clients. When you take photos of your home and you market that home for sale, it is on the internet forever. Right? So just want to make sure that they know that. Believe it or not, there still are some people who don't love that. We've had a couple of clients that are upset that their home, sold, and they still got, little Johnny's painted name on the wall and the picture of his room on the internet. So if they are sensitive about that, obviously put it differently. When, if you do in your listing presentation, you walk through the house and you do have fully customized rooms, or you have a big, we have a lot of that in the Low Country is, you've got the child's room and they've got their name on the wall. If they don't want that on the internet, you probably should say, hey, if that's not something you want in the photography to go on the internet, you might want to either A, we can tell the photographer not to take the picture of it, or B, you can go ahead and paint over the wall. And then this also lets them know, and the last part here is surveillance. The seller agrees to abide by any laws and regulations if they do want to surveil their property. If they do want to do that, then they need to let you know whether or not you can or cannot disclose potential surveillance. If they are going to surveil and they ask you what the laws are, have them look it up. So you're not the one giving them faulty advice. If they do say they do not want it disclosed, you do need to let them know that all buyers by default are told that the houses may be surveilling. That's what the buyer's agency agreement says. There's a section 20 something on that one as well that says, beware that when you go into a house, you may be surveilled. And then 28 is any other terms or conditions, which could be early exit agreement. If you did have any reimbursements or anything you want to put in there, don't write it up yourself. Let me know if you did want to add something to that. We'll make sure we have some approved verbiage for you. Signatures, initials, and we are done with the listing agreement. Questions? Nancy, fire away.
One quick question.
That's up there. I'm like looking down. Yes.
I thought audio surveillance is illegal, but video is okay. Isn't that true? Like all
Video
over?
without audio, I think is okay. Audio, I'm not sure. Manny's muted.
I thought audio was a one-party consent here in South Carolina. Is it not, or is that just video?
No, audio is two-party consent only.
Party consent.
Yeah, both parties have to agree to it.
Video is one party without
Right.
audio. That being said, if you're working with a buyer, don't stand by the front door and talk about how you like the house and you're ready. You'll pay full price, but you're going to go in low.
I always tell my buyers to walk away from those Zoom, or they have those doorbells, because they can hear you.
Yeah.
Talking, in front of the house. So I always try to like walk away more towards like the mailbox, but yeah.
Yep. All right. Other questions? All right. So a couple things from a listing standpoint.